Day 8 will be very busy. We'll go to the William Howard Taft Home National Historic Site, then drive to Dayton, Ohio to see the Aviation Heritage National Historical Park, where we'll visit the Visitor Center and see the Wright Brothers Cycle Shop. Go to Hawthorne Hall, and then go to Caroline Historical Park to see the 1905 airplane. Then we'll drive to Huffman Prairie Flying Field, where they flew after Kitty Hawk, drive to Indianapolis to spend the night. Let's get started. Soon we're arriving at the William Howard Taft Home National Historic Site. This is the home where William Howard Taft grew up for most of his life, the first 25 years anyway, as a child, and then lived here. We'll be visiting the Visitor Center, where we'll join a group that is heading over to the house. There we'll be touring the house with that group. The group gathers in a room until the guide gets up with us. And we look around. Here's Taft at 2 and 10 years old. This house is 3 stories. And we'll start at the children's bedroom, where he lived for the first about 6 years of his life. This bed was used by the nanny. Next we come to his father Alfonso's office, where they studied when they came home from school, and also learned about politics and read newspapers from all over the world. Across the hall is the parlor. This is where many guests come to discuss politics with their father, and they were able to learn much about the politics and what was going on in the world, and become very educated in many different levels. Almost all of the furniture was sold off at one time, so these are replicas of what would have been here, or period pieces. The carpet and wallpaper, though, are original patterns. His father Alfonso was big into politics, and his mother Louisa was an activist. And our guide tells us all about their family life. Upstairs is a historical display. Here's Alfonso Taft's law desk. And here's a picture as a salutatorian of Taft. Here's some of the things from his presidential campaign. He was a community leader who did many things in Dayton, became Secretary of War, was the provisional governor of Cuba. He also commanded the building of the Panama Canal and set up the government in the Philippines after we conquered it. As president, he was a trust buster, busting up many of the major companies in the United States, and started the income tax. They built a special tub because he was so large. He was the last one to graze animals on the White House grounds. He was the first president with a motor car and the first one to throw out the opening. Here's a picture of his family. His wife Helen Herron, his oldest son Robert, Helen his daughter, and Charles his youngest son. Helen was very into politics and wanted him to be president, but she got sick shortly after they got there. He really wanted to be a justice, and eventually made Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He helped to design the Supreme Court building that we currently have. After the Taft, the house was used by many different members of the family and finally sold to the U.S. government. Now it's time to head out to Dayton, Ohio, where we'll see the National Aviation Historical Park and things about the Wright Brothers flying. Soon we're arriving in Dayton, Ohio, and we will head downtown to the Dayton Aviation Heritage National Historical Park. You'll notice the brick roads around the park. We'll be seeing many things while we're here. First stop will be the Visitor Center. Then we'll go to the Wright Cycle Shop. We'll go to Hawthorne Hall and go to the Huffman Prairie Field Interpretive Center and the field itself. Let's get started. First off, the Visitor Center. Here they have a replica of an old-time grocery store where you came in and told them what you wanted, and then they went and got it, rather than you pushing a shopping cart around. In the lobby is a replica of one of their gliders. They used gliders before they had powered flight to learn the principles of flight. The two brothers were almost inseparable. They started their own printing business and never really married. Their first business was printing, and they never really gave that up. They had a printing shop above all of their cycle shops. And here's a picture of their printing presses. Her mother was Susan Corner, and her father was a bishop in the Methodist Church, Milton Wright. And here's a picture of the boys. Wilbur was the older one by 3 years. And this is their fourth bicycle shop. Upstairs was their printing press. This is the one where they started thinking about flight. The fifth one is where they started experimenting, and we'll look at that, a model of that later. This is the only picture of this cycle shop. Bicycling was becoming very popular in the United States at this time, and they thought, hey, we know how to do mechanics. Why can't we build bicycles for them also? And so they started their shop with their showroom in the front. Here are some of their prices at that time. In 1895, $100 for a bicycle. And their shop was in the back where they manufactured them from scrap. And now it's time to leave this area. But as we leave, if you'll notice on the left-hand side of the street in front of us is a red car. This is in front of a replica of the house that they lived in when they were in Dayton, Ohio. You have to have a replica because Henry Ford bought the house, had it torn down, moved it to Dearborn, Michigan, and had it reconstructed in his place, which we'll look at later, the original house. Now we head out to Carillon Historical Park and Museum. Here we're going to see a museum of the Wright Brothers. The Carillons here are what the park is named after. And as we arrive, they have an old-timey baseball game going on. This is a park of many different types of historical buildings that have been moved here, and also a museum to the Wright Brothers. We visit the local Locust Grove School. And as we look inside, wow, there's Deborah the Explorer teaching. This is the oldest standing building in Dayton, the Newcomb Tavern from 1796. And now we go to the Wright Brothers National Museum here, where we will look at the various things about the Wrights. This is a replica of the fifth shop that they own. This is where they started experimenting with flight. In the front was a sales area again, and then in the back a workshop for building and repairing bicycles, which was still their main function. They built each one of the parts by hand, so it was a labor-intensive thing. And if you notice, the belts were driven by this motor, and all of them were belt-driven. This is an actual bicycle they built from 1901. But they also, during the off-season, started experimenting with flight and built a wind tunnel to experiment with various configurations of wind. They went to Kitty Hawk because of the wind and sand and practiced with gliders for 3 years before they ever started thinking about powered flight. And now we're heading into Wright Hall, built by Orville Wright. This is the 1905 original Wright Flyer. This is one of their earliest powered aircraft. And yes, it's not a replica, it's original. Notice a few things about it. They had to build a small engine for it. It's covered by fabric. But if you'll notice, there is no metal listed anywhere here. It's all made out of wood, but they painted it silver because they wanted their competition to think they were using metal. They knew that even aluminum would be too heavy to fly. Note also the elevator that they used to go up and down in. and the hip cradle that they used for controlling the rudder and wing warp for direction. How did this work? Well, here's a little model that shows. Seems rather awkward to me. They designed their own engine from scratch with the first aluminum block anywhere. And here's a historical area in the back with many historical things that came from the Wright brothers. And here is their original pattern. They flew many demonstrations along the way, and the first flying boat. In 1909, they attached the canoe since they were over water, afraid it might need it to float. That original canoe is still here in the museum today. This is a picture of the Wright brothers assembling an airplane and the steering wheel from that airplane. Orville and Amelia met in 1929. It is amazing how things have moved. In 1905, this was the most technologically advanced flying machine around. 64 years later, we landed on the moon. 64 years. Now moving outside, we see the Smith Covered Bridge. We also come to the Dayton Cyclery. The Huffy Corporation was formed here, originally as a sewing machine factory. Then they started making bicycles, and many people have had Huffies along the way, even the radio bike. Then we go to Dayton Sales in 1911. This was a car dealership. They have many different old cars here. The 1908 Hatfield, one of the earliest cars. The 1910 Speedwell competition for Henry Ford. The Custer gasoline chair, first powered wheelchairs. The Lambert, another competition for Henry Ford's Model T. Cleveland motorcycle, 1918. And the 1908 Stoddard. Outside, we look at an old gas station where they pumped the gas up into the glass chamber to check gallons and then drained it into your tank. And now it's time to head to Hawthorne Hall. Orville and Wilbur were building this hall in order for them to live in it. But Orville died about a year before it was finished. And so what they did was their sister actually moved in when it was finished in 1914. And this is where she and her family lived. Now we head out to Huffman Prairie Flying Field. They were at Kitty Hawk because they needed the wind for gliders, but now they decided they needed to go someplace where they could actually take off from flat land without wind by motor power to have a really useful airplane. So they came to the Huffman Prairie area and used the cow pasture. This is the interpretive center that we're at right now. Here we will look at several things. The interpretive center here. Across the road is a dam that was built to keep the area of the field from flooding. And then we'll go to the field itself where they actually flew off of. This is the flood control dam that was built back then. And this is the monument for the brothers. The leaves are starting to change color, and now we go to the interpretive center. This is their demonstration team in 1910, and the first person to die of an airplane crash was Ralph Johnson. Not a very good way to be made into history. And now we head to the field itself. It's kind of hard to get to and find. They moved out here after Kitty Hawk in about 1904. And started perfecting their flying with an engine from this flat field. It was really a cow pasture to begin with. The white flags were set up on the corners to see what the wind was doing, and they tried to actually fly when there was no wind so they could prove that their airplane could do that. Part of this area has now become a tall grass prairie preserve left in its natural state. But this is the field where they actually flew, taking off and landing here on numerous occasions. Here you can find the launching frame. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And a replica of their hangar. At first they weren't able to take off from a dead stop, so they built this A-frame, pulled the weight to the top, attached the string to the front of the airplane, and then shot it down the track, thus the first catapult. And this is a replica of their hangar. By 1910, they were so confident they started training a flight school here, and many of the first pilots in the nation learned how to fly here. And now it's time to head to Indianapolis, where we will be spending the night. Soon we're arriving in Indianapolis, check into our hotel, and this brings us to the end of day 8.